Don't let anyone see this file. Not even your daughter. Destroy it after you read it. The dying doctor said this as he pushed the sealed envelope toward me inside the locked clinic room. I thought it was just a few old hospital records. But when I got home and opened the documents page by page, I froze. The final conclusion erased 33 years of my life and forced me to ask myself, who was the woman I had called my daughter all this time? If you found your way here today, thank you truly. Now tell me something, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. You might be surprised how many people are sitting with this story from the same corner of the world. This story blends fiction with purpose. Names and settings are coincidental, but the message woven through every chapter, that one is meant for you. It has been 341 days since Maggie passed. I know because I count them every morning when I wake up to a bed that is too quiet and a house that is too still. 341 mornings of reaching for the other side of the mattress before remembering. 341 cups of coffee brewed for two, poured for one. The bedroom at Callaway Manor faces east, and on clear mornings the light comes through the curtains in long gold strips that fall across the floor, like something Maggie would have called beautiful. She always said this room had the best light in all of Sullivan's Island. I used to tell her she said that about every room she loved. She would laugh and say, "Well, Edward, maybe I just love every room we're in together." I have not been able to open those curtains since October of last year. Some mornings the light comes through anyway, squeezing in at the edges, stubborn, the way she was stubborn. I was sitting on the edge of the bed that morning, a Tuesday, mid-October, the kind of morning where the harbor air carries just enough chill to remind you that summer is truly gone. When I looked at the nightstand drawer, I had been looking at that drawer for 3 days straight. Not because there was anything unusual about it. It was the same drawer where I kept her reading glasses after she passed, where I tucked the last birthday card she wrote me because I could not bring myself to move it. But 3 days ago I had placed something else inside it. A plain white envelope from a private genomics laboratory in Charleston. The kind of envelope that changes everything and nothing at the same time depending on what's inside. I had ordered the test quietly 2 weeks after a conversation that had shaken me to the core. A conversation I was not yet ready to fully revisit, not until I had proof in my hands. For 14 days I had waited. For 3 days after that envelope arrived, I had not been able to touch it. I pulled the drawer open. The envelope was right there, same as I had left it. My name was printed on the front in clean black type, Edward James Callaway. Below it, the lab's return address. Simple, clinical, indifferent to the fact that whatever was inside might be the most devastating document I had ever held. "All right, Maggie," I said out loud to the photograph on the nightstand, our wedding portrait taken 42 years ago on a June afternoon in Savannah. She was laughing in that photo, mid-laugh, the way the camera caught her before she could compose herself. It was my favorite picture of her for exactly that reason. All right, let's see what this tells us. My hands were steadier than I expected as I broke the seal. The results were 2 pages. The first page was the standard summary: case number, sample, collection date, client name. I skipped to the second page to the section marked Relationship Analysis, Probability of Biological Paternity. I read the number, then I read it again. Then I set the paper down on the duvet very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands suddenly cannot be trusted. Probability of biological relationship between Edward James Callaway and Clare Ann Callaway, 0.00%. 0, not low, not inconclusive. 0. The room did not spin. The walls did not close in. Everything stayed exactly where it was, the curtains, the photograph, the untouched cup of coffee on the dresser. Everything stayed perfectly, terribly still. 0, I said out loud, because I needed to hear the word in the air to believe it. 33 years. 33 years of school plays and skinned knees and late-night phone calls when she was homesick at college. 33 years of birthday cakes and Sunday dinners, and the way she used to fall asleep on the drive home from church when she was small, her head tilted against the car window. 33 years of calling her my girl, my Clare, my daughter, my heart, and meaning every single syllable of it. And now this piece of paper was telling me that none of it was written in blood. I walked to the window and gripped the curtain rod with both hands, not to open it, just to hold on to something solid. Outside the harbor was gray-green and quiet in the early morning light, a pelican gliding low over the water, the way they do when the tide is just right. Maggie used to say pelicans were the most patient creatures in the world. They know exactly what they're waiting for Edward, she told me once. They just wait until the moment is right. I had not been patient. I had been blind. I turned back to the nightstand and picked up the paper again. My eyes moved over every line, the percentages, the methodology, footnotes, the lab director's signature at the bottom. Every detail I had been hoping might somehow be wrong. Every detail that confirmed what I already knew deep in the part of myself I had been refusing to listen to for the past 2 weeks. What did they do to us, Maggie? My voice cracked on her name just slightly, in the way it does when I forget for a half second that she cannot answer anymore. What on earth did they do to our family? The paper slipped from my fingers and fell to the floor beside the bed. I did not pick it up. I sat down on the edge of the mattress, again in the same spot where I had started this morning, and I thought about the man who had put all of this in motion. The man with the trembling hands and the thick, sealed envelope, and the words that had been circling in my head for 14 days like something I could not swallow and could not spit out. Read it alone, he had whispered. Then decide what kind of man you want to be. I had not understood, not fully, not until this moment. The test result lay face up on the floor. I stared at it from the edge of the bed, and I felt something I had not expected to feel, not grief, not rage, not the shattering kind of shock I had braced myself for. What I felt was a terrible cold clarity, like a fog I had been living in for 33 years had finally lifted, and what I could see now was not ruins, but simply the truth, the plain, devastating, irreducible truth. I needed to go back to the beginning, back to that clinic in Mount Pleasant, back to the afternoon 2 weeks ago when a dying man had handed me something he had carried alone for 33 years and asked me without saying so directly whether I was strong enough to carry it forward. 2 weeks before I opened that envelope, alone in my bedroom, I had sat across from a dying man in a small clinic on the east side of Mount Pleasant and listened to him confess a sin that was not entirely his own. Dr. Martin Hess had called me the week before, said it was a routine checkup, the kind of thing he scheduled every 6 months for patients my age. I had known Martin for the better part of a decade, not a close friend, but a trusted one. The kind of doctor who remembered your wife's name and asked about your grandchildren even when you didn't have any. So I had not thought twice about the appointment. I had driven across the Ravenel Bridge on a Thursday afternoon, parked in the small lot beside his clinic, and walked in expecting a blood pressure reading and maybe a conversation about cholesterol. What I found instead was a man who looked like he had not slept in days. Martin was waiting for me in his personal office, not the examination room. The moment I stepped through the door, he moved past me and locked it from the inside. Then he crossed to the window and drew the blinds one cord at a time until the afternoon light was reduced to thin lines across the floor. A pot of coffee sat on his desk, already cold. He had not bothered to pour it. "Martin," I said, staying near the door, "you want to tell me what's going on?" He turned to face me, and that was when I saw it, the trembling in his hands. Not the mild unsteadiness of an old man. The deep, bone-level shaking of someone carrying something too heavy for too long. "Sit down, Edward," he said. "Please. I need you to sit down because what I'm about to tell you is going to take the floor out from under you and I'd rather you were already seated when it does." I sat. He did not. He placed a thick, sealed envelope on the desk between us, then stepped back from it, as if the thing had weight beyond paper and ink. My name was written across the front in his handwriting, which I recognized from years of prescription notes. But the letters were unsteady in a way I had never seen from him before. "I am dying," he said. Just like that. Flat and clear, the way you say something you have already made peace with. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. My oncologist gives me 3, maybe 4 months." He paused, then added almost as an afterthought, "I've had 6 months to sit with that news. I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because it's the reason you're here." My chest tightened. "Martin, I'm so sorry." "Don't." He held up one hand firm, but not unkind. "I've had my grief. Now I have something else to do with whatever time I have left." He pulled the chair from behind his desk and sat down across from me, close enough that I could see the yellowing at the edges of his eyes, the jaundice that comes with the territory. Edward I was 29 years old in the winter of 1991. I was a resident at St. Francis Memorial Hospital here in Charleston. Brand new. Still believed that medicine was purely about doing the right thing. His mouth pulled into something that was not quite a smile. I was very young. He told me about the night of January 12th. A winter storm had knocked out power to a section of the hospital just after 11 at night. The backup generators covered the critical care units and the operating rooms, but not the maternity ward, not fully, not for the first 20 minutes. And in those 20 minutes, in the half-dark, with the flashlights and the shouting and the nurses running between rooms, 2 baby girls were born within 40 minutes of each other. "Your wife," Martin said, watching my face carefully, "delivered at 11:47. A woman in the room next door delivered at 12:22. Her name was Patricia Odom, a nurse on the labor and delivery floor, who happened to be admitted that same night." He stopped. "I'm sorry. That's not relevant." The other mother's name was Donna Hartwell, a school teacher from Columbia. She and her husband had been trying for years. He told me what happened next with the measured pace of a man who had rehearsed this confession so many times it had worn grooves in him. A delivery nurse rushing between 2 rooms in the dark, managing 2 babies, 2 sets of ID bracelets. 2 exhausted mothers had placed the wristbands on the wrong infants. A simple error. A terrible, irrevocable, entirely human error. "By 6 in the morning I had caught it," Martin said. His voice was steady, but his hands had not stopped trembling since I sat down. "A blood type discrepancy in the paperwork. I went straight to Gerald Whitmore. He was chief of staff at the time. I told him what I found. I told him we needed to contact both families immediately and make it right. And..." My own voice sounded strange to me, far away, like I was hearing it from another room. Martin looked down at his hands, then back up at me. And he told me to sit down and listen very carefully. He said that if this went public, the hospital would face lawsuits that would shut it down within the year. He said every doctor on staff that night would lose their license. He said the families had already bonded with their babies, that disrupting that bond would cause more harm than good. And then he said... Martin's jaw tightened. He said that what had happened was no one's fault, and that there was no reason for anyone's life to be destroyed over it. "He covered it up," I said. "Every original record was altered. Every staff member on shift that night was told to sign amended documentation or face termination." Martin reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small key on a plain ring. He set it on the desk beside the envelope. "I was 29 years old, Edward. I had $200,000 in medical school debt. I had a wife who was 3 months pregnant. I told myself I was protecting people. I told myself the families were better off not knowing." He lifted his eyes to mine, and what was in them was not a request for absolution. It was something far more honest than that. I have never in 33 years believed a single word of that. He slid the envelope across the desk toward me. Inside is the night log I kept from January 12, 1991. Handwritten original entries, not the amended version. It documents both births, the times, the bracelet numbers, everything. There is also a private DNA analysis I commissioned 3 months ago. I told the laboratory I was conducting genealogical research. His voice dropped lower. The results confirm what the blood type told me 33 years ago, Edward. Clare is not your biological daughter, and your biological daughter has been living as someone else's child her entire life. The air in that room tasted different after he said it. Thinner somehow. Don't let Clare see this, Martin said. He stood slowly favoring his left side the way people do when the pain has settled in for good. Don't let your son-in-law near it. Read it alone in a place where no one can find you. Then decide what kind of man you want to be. He walked to the door and unlocked it, and I understood that the appointment was over. Martin. My voice stopped him with his hand on the doorframe. He turned. Why now? After all this time, why now? He considered the question for a long moment, the way a man considers something he has asked himself 10,000 times. Because I spent 33 years telling myself it was too late to fix, he said finally. And then I got sick, and I realized the only thing worse than having done nothing would be to die having done nothing. He opened the door, and the ordinary sounds of the clinic phones, the front desk radio, someone laughing in the waiting room came flooding back in. I'm sorry, Edward. I am profoundly, irreversibly sorry. That doesn't fix anything. But I needed you to know. He stepped out. I sat in that office for another 15 minutes without moving the envelope on the desk in front of me, the key beside it, the cold coffee untouched. And somewhere between sitting down and finally standing up, I had made a quiet, unspoken decision, one that I would not fully understand, until I was sitting on the edge of my bed 2 weeks later, holding a sheet of paper with a 0% probability printed on it in clean black ink. I don't know how long I sat on that bedroom floor after the test results slipped from my hands. Long enough for the morning light to shift from gold to white. Long enough for the coffee on the dresser to go completely cold. Long enough for the silence in that room to stop feeling like absence and start feeling like pressure, like something pushing against the walls from the inside. When I finally got to my feet, my knees ached the way they always do now in the morning, the kind of protest that comes with 68 years of living in a body that has worked hard and slept poorly and carried more than it let on. I walked out of the bedroom, down the hallway, and stopped in front of the door I had not been able to open in 341 days. Maggie's study, her room, the place she went when she wanted to think or write, or simply be alone with herself in the way that people who love each other deeply still sometimes need. I pressed my palm flat against the door. The wood was cool. All right, sweetheart, I said barely above a whisper. I'm coming in. The room smelled like her. That was the first thing and the hardest. Her perfume had worked its way into the curtains, into the spines of the books on the shelves, into the grain of the old writing desk she had inherited from her mother. I stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds, with my hand gripping the frame, breathing through my nose, telling myself to keep moving. Her desk was exactly as she had left it. A ceramic mug full of pens, a stack of paperback novels with bookmarks sticking out at various angles. She had always read 3 or 4 books at the same time, said. It kept her mind nimble. A framed photograph of the two of us at Folly Beach, maybe 15 years ago. Both of us squinting into the sun and laughing at something I couldn't remember anymore. I sat in her chair. It was smaller than mine, upholstered in green fabric she had picked out herself, and reupholstered twice over the years, because she said the color made her feel calm. I ran my hands along the armrests. Talk to me, Maggie. I said out loud. Tell me what you knew. I started opening drawers. Not roughly, not with urgency, just steadily, the way you search when you're not entirely sure what you're looking for, but trust that you'll recognize it when you find it. The top drawer held stamps, a letter opener, rubber bands gone brittle with age. The middle drawer was stuffed with Christmas card envelopes and old birthday ribbons she could never bring herself to throw away. The bottom drawer was locked. I stared at it for a moment. Then I remembered the small brass key on the ring I had found in her jewelry box, 6 months after she passed, the one I hadn't known what to open. I had put it in my own desk drawer and forgotten about it. I went and retrieved it, came back, fitted it into the lock, and felt the catch release. Inside was a single notebook. Blue cloth cover, no label on the front. The kind of plain, serious journal that meant business. I opened to the first page, her handwriting neat and slightly left-leaning, the way it always was. For my eyes only. MC 1991. My throat closed up so fast it surprised me. I pressed 2 fingers against my mouth and waited for the feeling to pass. Then I turned the page. She wrote about the early months, her pregnancy, the way her ankles swelled in the summer heat. The argument we had about baby names that ended with both of us laughing so hard we had to sit down. She wrote about being afraid and excited, and how sometimes the 2 feelings were so tangled up she couldn't tell them apart. Reading her words felt like hearing her voice in a room I thought had gone permanently quiet, and my eyes burned so badly I had to stop twice and press the heels of my hands against them before I could continue. Then I reached January of 1991. Her entry from the night of the 12th was short. She had been in labor, exhausted, writing only a few lines in the hours after delivery. But the entry from 2 days later stopped me cold. Something felt wrong this morning. When the nurse brought her to me, I asked about the blood type paperwork from the delivery. I could have sworn Dr. Hess mentioned a discrepancy the day before. The nurse smiled and said everything was perfectly fine, but her hands were shaking when she said it. I noticed that. I noticed and then told myself I was being paranoid, that new mothers invent things to worry about. I read that paragraph 4 times. My chest felt like something had reached in and squeezed. You noticed, I breathed. Maggie, you noticed. A week later, she had written again. I asked Dr. Whitmore today about what I remembered hearing. He laughed very gently, very kindly, and told me the pain medication during labor can cause confusion, that new mothers often misremember things in the first days. He said Clare was perfectly healthy and perfectly ours, and that I should focus on resting. I think he's right. I think I'm exhausted and inventing shadows. She's so beautiful. She reached for my finger this morning and held on, and I thought, how could anything about this be wrong? A tear hit the page before I realized I was crying. I pulled the notebook back, quickly, wiped the page with my sleeve, and then sat there with my face in my hands, shoulders shaking, the kind of crying that doesn't make much sound, because it comes from somewhere too deep for noise. She had been so close. She had been standing right at the edge of the truth, and a man with authority and a calm voice had smiled and walked her back from it. And she had trusted him because she wanted to, because the alternative was unthinkable. I stayed in her chair for a long time after the tears stopped. I held the notebook in my lap, her handwriting open in front of me, and I talked to her the way I had been talking to her photograph for 341 days, except this time, for the first time, I felt like she was talking back. You were right, I told her. You were right, and they lied to you. And I am so sorry it took me 33 years to find out what you already felt in your bones. I closed the journal carefully, held it against my chest for a moment. Then one question rose up through the grief, quiet and precise as a blade. If Maggie had sensed something was wrong from the very beginning, what had Clare sensed after 33 years of living inside this family? I did not sleep that night, not a single hour. I sat at my desk downstairs until 3 in the morning, with Maggie's journal on one side of me and Martin Hess's sealed envelope on the other. And I thought about the question that had followed me out of her study and down the stairs and into every dark corner of that house. What had Claire felt all these years, living in a family that was not hers by blood? By the time the sun came up, gray and reluctant, the way October mornings sometimes are in the low country, I had my answer. Or rather, I found it. Right there on the family computer I kept in the corner of my study, the one Claire used whenever she and Derek came to visit and she needed to print something or check her email. The one I had never thought to question because why would I? She was my daughter. This was her home. I opened the browser. I went to the email account we had shared for family correspondence, holiday planning, contractor, quotes for the house, that sort of thing. I had not checked it in months. Then I noticed the browser had saved a second session, Claire's personal account still signed in from her last visit. She had used this computer to check her private email before, and the browser had remembered her. I had never thought twice about it. Until now. I almost missed it. The trash folder. 30 days of deleted messages waiting to be permanently purged. And there near the bottom, dated March 14th of 2018, 6 years ago, was an email from a genetic testing service in Atlanta, Georgia. The recipient was listed as Clare A. Calloway. My hand hovered over the mouse. Then I clicked. The subject line read, "Your ancestry DNA health results are ready." I read the full report in under 2 minutes. It did not take longer than that. The language was plain, and the conclusion was unambiguous, no detectable biological relationship between test subject and reference profiles submitted as father and mother. She had submitted our DNA as reference profiles. That meant she had obtained samples from a glass, a hairbrush, something in this house, and sent them in deliberately. She had not stumbled onto this by accident. She had gone looking. March 14th, 2018. Claire had been 27 years old. Maggie had still been alive. We had eaten Easter dinner together that year. I remembered it clearly, because Claire had made Maggie's grandmother's sweet potato pie recipe for the first time and gotten it exactly right, and Maggie had cried a little at the table and said, "You're going to carry this family forward, sweetheart. I know you are." I pushed back from the desk so fast, the chair scraped the hardwood loud enough to echo. "No?" I said out loud to nobody, to the empty room. "No, no, no." I went back to the email. Below the results, still in the trash folder, was a second message sent that same afternoon from Claire's personal account to an address I recognized immediately as Derek's work email. I opened it. D results came back. Confirmed. I'm not biological. I don't know what to do with this. Call me when you can. Don't tell anyone. My legs stopped working correctly. I grabbed the edge of the desk with both hands to keep from going down and stood there bent over the keyboard, breathing in short, hard pulls through my nose, staring at 11 words that rearranged every memory I had of the past 6 years. I don't know what to do with this, but she had known exactly what to do with it. She had done nothing. She had come to Easter dinner and gotten the pie exactly right, and watched Maggie cry and said, "I love you, Mom," and driven home and gotten into bed beside Derek Maddox and chosen silence. Chosen it deliberately. Chosen it every single day for 6 years. I sat back down. My hands were trembling so badly I had to press them flat on the desktop. "Claire." Her name came out of me, broken, barely a word at all. "Baby girl, what did you do?" I forced myself to keep looking. I went through every message in that trash folder, 20-30 emails, until I found what I was dreading. A thread between Claire and Derek dated 4 months after the initial results. October 2018. Derek had written, "I've been thinking about the timeline. If the old man doesn't update his estate documents before something happens to him, probate could get complicated. We should talk to someone about contingency options." Claire had replied, "Let's not rush this. He's healthy. We have time." "We have time." I read those 3 words until they stopped being words and became something else entirely. A sound, low and continuous, like the moment before a structure gives way. I stood up from the desk, walked to the window, and pressed my forehead against the cold glass. Outside, the oak trees in the front yard were losing the last of their leaves, and the harbor beyond Sullivan's Island was the color of pewter under the flat October sky. A neighborhood I had lived in for 40 years. A house I had built my entire life inside of. She knew, I said, and my voice sounded old to me in a way it hadn't the day before. She sat at my table and she knew. I straightened up, wiped my face with the back of my hand, stood there until my breathing evened out and my hands steadied, and something cold and clear moved into the place where the grief had been. I picked up the phone from the desk, scrolled past Claire's name, past the contact I had labeled Clare, my girl, 15 years ago, and never changed, and kept going until I found the number I needed. Robert Flanagan. Bob. 40 years of friendship. 40 years of straight talk. The only man in Charleston I trusted as much as I had trusted Maggie. He picked up on the second ring. Edward? Everything all right? No, I said. Nothing is all right. I need you to clear your morning, Bob. I have something you need to see, and I don't think either of us is going to like where it leads. A beat of silence. Then Bob's voice came back low and serious, the voice he used when he understood without needing to be told. I'll put the coffee on, he said. Come now. I grabbed my keys and Martin's envelope and Maggie's journal, and I walked out of the house into the cold morning air, leaving behind the family computer, with its 30 days of evidence still sitting in the trash folder, counting down to permanent deletion, holding 6 years of silence in 11 quiet words. By the time I pulled into the parking garage on King Street, my hands had steadied enough to grip the wheel properly, but my chest hadn't caught up yet. It still felt like something was sitting on it, heavy and permanent, the way grief settles in when it realizes it's going to be staying a while. Bob Flanagan's office was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been on King Street since before either of us was born. The elevator was slow, the carpet in the hallway was the same burgundy it had been for 20 years, and the brass nameplate beside the door still read, Flanagan and Associates, Attorneys at Law, in the same font Bob had chosen when he opened the practice in 1987. Some things in Charleston don't change, and I had always found that comforting. That morning, walking through that door, I needed every ounce of comfort I could find. Bob was already up from behind his desk when I came in. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered even at 70, with silver hair. He kept short, and a handshake that had closed more deals than most people had hot meals. He had been my attorney, my sounding board, and my friend since the year Maggie and I bought our first piece of commercial property together. He had sat beside me at her funeral and not said a single unnecessary word, which was the most valuable thing anyone did for me that day. He took one look at my face and said, "Sit down, Edward. You look like you drove here from the bottom of the harbor." "I feel like it," I said, dropping into the chair across from his desk. I told him everything. All of it, in order: Martin Hess, the envelope, the DNA results, Maggie's journal, the email in the trash folder, Derek's message about estate documents and contingency options. Bob listened the way good lawyers listen, which is to say, he did not interrupt once, did not react visibly, and kept his eyes on me the entire time. When I finished, the room was quiet, except for the muffled sound of King Street traffic 3 floors below. Then Bob opened his desk drawer and placed a folder on the desk between us. "Martin Hess sent me a copy," he said, 3 weeks ago. He told me he was going to meet with you, and he wanted a second set of hands holding the original documents in case anything happened to his copies." Bob's jaw tightened slightly. "I've been waiting for you to call." I stared at the folder. "You knew. I knew what Martin sent me. I didn't know what you knew or what you were going to do about it." He folded his hands on top of the folder. "So I spent those 3 weeks doing what I do, Edward. I started digging." He opened the folder and laid out the first page, a printed summary of public records searches on Derek Maddox. Your son-in-law, Bob said. And he said it the way you'd say the defendant contacted 3 separate law firms in South Carolina over the past 2 years. Different firms, different cities, Greenville, Columbia, and one here in Charleston. All 3 consultations were about the same topic. He slid the page across to me. The legal process for petitioning a court to declare an elderly person mentally incompetent and transfer control of their financial assets to a designated guardian. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like a physical fall. In plain terms, Bob continued watching my face, Derek was shopping for a lawyer to help him have you legally declared incapable of managing your own affairs. Once that petition is granted by a judge, which requires a psychiatric evaluation and a court hearing, a guardian is appointed to control the person's finances, property, and major life decisions. The target loses the legal right to manage their own estate. He was going to have me declared incompetent, I said slowly. The words felt like stones in my mouth. He was preparing to. He hadn't filed anything yet, probably waiting for the right moment or the right lawyer. Bob pulled out a second page. But that's not all. 6 months ago, a new financial services company was registered with the South Carolina Secretary of State. The company is called Maddox and Partners, LLC. It is listed as an investment management firm. The registered agent is not Derek Maddox. It's a man named Glenn Torbett, a former business associate of Derek's from 10 years back. But through a lawful subpoena issued during our preliminary inquiry, we obtained the beneficial ownership records filed with the Federal Financial Crimes Enforcement Network records that companies are now required to submit under anti-money laundering regulations, though they are not available to the general public. Those records list Derek Maddox as the primary beneficial owner. He hid it behind someone else's name, I said. Barely, Bob said, his voice going dry. The regulatory disclosure requirements changed in 2024. Companies now have to file beneficial ownership information with the Federal Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Derek either didn't know about the new rules or didn't think anyone would look. He set down a third page, a contact log Coulter had put together. And then there's this. Ray Coulter, he's a private investigator I've worked with for 15 years, sharp as they come. I asked him to look into Derek's movements over the past year. 6 months ago, Derek met with a woman named Patricia Odom at a coffee shop in North Charleston. They were together for about 40 minutes. I felt the hair on my arms rise. Patricia Odom. Martin mentioned that name. She was the delivery nurse on shift the night of the 12th. She was. Bob looked at me steadily. She's retired now, lives alone in North Charleston. We don't know what was said in that meeting, but the fact that Derek Maddox sought her out tells us one thing very clearly. He already knew about the switched babies before any of this came to light. He knew, and he was making sure the right people stayed quiet. I pushed back from the desk and stood up. My legs felt unreliable, like the floor had softened underneath me. I walked to the window and looked out at King Street, at the tourists and the horse-drawn carriages and the shop owners rolling out their sidewalk signs for the morning, and I thought about Derek at my dining table cutting his steak and asking about my blood pressure medication with what I had always taken for genuine concern. Bob, I said without turning around, how long has he been planning this? Based on the timeline, I heard Bob exhale slowly behind me. My best guess is that Derek found out about the switched babies around the same time Clare did, 2018, maybe earlier. The Maddox and Partners registration is recent, but the groundwork, the conversations with lawyers, the contact with Odom, that started at least 2 years ago. This is not impulsive, Edward. His voice was quiet and precise. This man did not marry your daughter because he loved her. He married her because he understood exactly what she represented and what you were worth. Every dinner, every holiday, every time he shook your hand, it was a transaction. You just didn't know you were the one being sold. I turned back around. My eyes were burning, but I was not going to cry in Bob's office. Not about Derek Maddox. That man did not deserve my tears. What do we do? I asked. Bob straightened up in his chair and looked at me with the calm, focused expression of a man who had been waiting for exactly that question. First, he said, we go see Martin Hess. Because before we build a case, I need to understand exactly what physical evidence we have and how solid it is. He was already reaching for his jacket on the back of his chair. And Edward, whatever Martin kept from that night in 1991, we need to make sure Derek Maddox never gets near it. By early afternoon, the rain had started. Bob drove. I sat in the passenger seat of his old Lincoln and watched the Ravenel Bridge arc up through low gray clouds over the Cooper River, the cables disappearing into the mist like something half-finished. I had crossed that bridge 1,000 times. It had never looked quite so uncertain before. You doing all right over there? Bob asked, eyes on the road. I'm working on it, I said. He nodded and didn't push. 40 years of friendship had taught Bob Flanagan the difference between a man who needed to talk and a man who needed to think. He never confused the two. We pulled up to Martin's clinic in Mount Pleasant just before 2. The receptionist looked up when we walked in with an expression caught between surprise and relief. Dr. Hess said you might come by, she said. He's in his private office. Go on back. Martin was waiting behind his desk, seated, which told me something. The last time I had been here, he had been moving with urgent energy, locking doors, drawing blinds. Today, he stayed in his chair. The cancer was doing what cancer does, and doing it faster than 3 months ago. But his eyes were sharp, moving from me to Bob, with the focused clarity of a man who had made a decision and wasn't second-guessing it. Robert, he said, nodding at Bob. I wondered when Edward would bring you in. Should have been sooner, Bob said, settling across the desk. You should have called me directly, Martin. I could have given you legal protection. Martin's mouth curved faintly. I didn't come forward for protection. I came forward because I'm dying, and I needed to do one decent thing before I did. He looked at me. You opened the envelope. I did, I said. DNA confirmed, 0% probability. Martin closed his eyes for just a moment, not from shock, but from the weight of hearing it spoken plainly. When he opened them, he said quietly, I'm sorry, Edward. In a way that language isn't built to carry. I know, I said. But right now, I need to know what we have to work with. Bob leaned forward. The hospital records from January 1991, what's left. Martin exhaled. St. Francis digitized everything in 2005. The original 1991 paper records were flagged for destruction during the transition standard procedure, they said. But Gerald Whitmore signed off on the destruction order personally. Specifically and personally. His voice went flat. Which tells you everything about why those particular records no longer exist. So nothing remains in the official system, I said. Nothing that would help you. Martin pushed himself up slowly, favoring his left side, and moved to the bookshelf behind his desk. He reached up and pulled down a flat metal tin, dark green paint edges worn to bare silver. He set it on the desk and opened it. Inside, wrapped in yellowed cloth, was a hardcover notebook. Dark blue, the size of a legal pad. Martin unwrapped it with the care of someone handling something irreplaceable, which I was beginning to understand it was. I kept the night log, he said. Every resident kept one, a personal record of the shift, separate from official documentation. Handwritten. Nobody's writing but mine. He opened it to a page near the middle and placed it facing us. January 12th, 1991. 2 births. Every detail, times, room numbers, bracelet identification numbers, parent names, the precise sequence during the power failure. Bob put on his reading glasses and bent over the page deliberately. And here, Martin said, pointing to a marginal notation in smaller script. I added this the morning after, before Whitmore told me what was going to happen. Bob read it aloud quietly. Bracelet discrepancy confirmed 6 a.m. Whitmore informed, decision made. Lord forgive us. The room went absolutely still. 3 words. I said, my voice rougher than intended. Decision made. That's 33 years in 3 words. Anyone reading that log will understand exactly what it means, Martin said, lowering himself back carefully. The discrepancy was found, the person in authority was told, and a decision was made not to correct it, but to bury it. That logbook is the only original contemporaneous record of what happened that night. It predates the falsified hospital documentation by hours. Bob straightened and looked at Martin over his glasses. This is admissible. Combined with the DNA evidence and Edward's testimony, this is a foundation. Take it, Martin said, pushing the tin toward Bob without hesitation. I kept it 33 years because I couldn't throw it away and was too afraid to use it. I am done being afraid. He looked directly at me. There's one more thing. The DNA report in your envelope identifies the child sent home with the other family. Finding her won't be simple, but it won't be impossible. My heart clenched like a fist closing around itself. She's alive, I whispered. As of 3 months ago, yes, she's alive, and she has no idea who she really is. I pressed my fingers to the bridge of my nose and breathed slow, deliberate, the way Maggie always told me to breathe when I needed to hold myself together. Somewhere out there was a woman with my blood in her veins and Maggie's eyes in her face, living her entire life without knowing that a power outage on a winter night in 1991 had rewritten everything. Bob placed the tin in his briefcase and snapped it shut. On the drive back, rain hammered the Lincoln's roof in steady sheets. I watched the harbor below gray, wind-churned whitecaps rolling toward Sullivan's Island and thought about a little girl handed to the wrong family in the dark. Bob, I said as Charleston's lights came up through the rain. We need to find her. Before anything else, I need to know who she is. Bob kept his eyes on the wet road. I'll call Coulter tonight, he said. If she's out there, Ray will find her. It took Ray Coulter exactly 6 days. 6 days to trace a name from a 33-year-old handwritten logbook to a living, breathing woman standing in front of a classroom of 8-year-olds in Columbia, 120 miles from where she was born. Bob had called him the night we drove back from Mount Pleasant, and Ray had driven over to King Street first thing the next morning. I was already there when he arrived, a compact man in his mid-50s with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of quiet, deliberate manner that told you he spent most of his working life observing people who didn't know they were being observed. Bob introduced us simply. Edward Calloway, Ray Coulter. He's the best investigator I've ever worked with, and I've worked with a lot of them. Ray had shaken my hand and said, "Tell me what you need found." So I had told him. And 6 days later, on a Thursday morning, with thin autumn sunlight coming through the blinds in Bob's office, Ray laid a manila folder on the desk between us and said, "I found her." My heart stopped. Just for a beat, one full beat of nothing, and then it came back harder than before. "Her name is Lily Hartwell," Ray said, opening the folder. 33 years old, born January 12, 1991, at St. Francis Memorial Hospital, Charleston. Placed with the Hartwell family through the hospital's standard newborn discharge process. No formal adoption, because as far as the paperwork was concerned, Dorothy and Frank Hartwell were her biological parents. The records said so. The records were wrong. He slid a printed page across the desk. She grew up in Columbia, went to the University of South Carolina, graduated with a degree in elementary education. She's been teaching 3rd grade at Palmetto Elementary School in Columbia for the past 6 years. I picked up the page. It was a summary employment records address, a few background details, and at the bottom a photograph Ray had taken from the school's public staff directory. A headshot. Professional, slightly stiff the way school photos tend to be. A woman with light brown hair and a smile that looked like it came easily and often. I looked at that photograph and my throat closed completely. "Bob," I managed my voice dropping to something barely functional. Bob, look at this. Bob leaned over and studied the photo. Then he looked at me, and something shifted in his expression, quiet and careful. I see it, he said softly. The smile. The way the corners of her eyes crinkled when she smiled. The slight tilt of her head. I had seen that exact expression 10,000 times across 40 years of marriage, and I had never once thought about where it might have come from, because I had never had reason to. Lily Hartwell had Maggie's smile. Not similar, identical, down to the last detail. She doesn't know anything, Ray said, reading my face accurately. No indication she's ever questioned her background. The Hartwells are good people, retired school teachers themselves still living in Colombia. She visits them regularly. By all accounts, she had a normal, stable, happy childhood. He paused. She deserves to know the truth, Mr. Calloway. But she deserves to hear it carefully. I know, I said. I set the photograph down on the desk because my hands had started trembling, and I did not want Ray to see it. How do I reach her? Reach. She lives alone, Ray said. I have her home address. I'd recommend a letter before any in-person contact, give her the chance to process, before she has to put a face to any of this. He slid another page across. I'd also recommend you be honest but measured in that first letter. Don't lay everything out at once. Just enough to make her understand it's serious and that you're not a threat. I sat at Bob's desk that evening after everyone had left and wrote the letter by hand. I must have started 6 times, crumpled 5 sheets of paper before I found the right words, or close enough to write that I could live with them. I told her I had information related to her birth that she deserved to know. I told her I was not a danger to her. I told her I was a 68-year-old man from Charleston who was simply trying to find the truth after it had been hidden for a very long time. I signed it Edward Calloway and wrote my phone number at the bottom. Then I drove to the post office on East Bay Street myself and handed it across the counter in person. I did not trust myself to drop it in a mailbox and walk away. I needed to watch it go. On the drive home, I stopped on the Ravenel Bridge and sat there for 10 minutes in the dark, engine idling, looking out at the lights of the harbor below. Somewhere 120 miles north, a woman with Maggie's smile was finishing her school day and going home to an apartment she did not yet know was about to be disrupted by a letter from a stranger. I thought about what it was going to feel like when she opened it. I thought about whether she would call or write back, or simply decide the whole thing sounded too strange to engage with. 3 days passed. 4, my phone stayed quiet. On the 5th day, Clare called. "Daddy," she said, warm as honey, easy as a Sunday morning. "Derek and I are coming for dinner this weekend. I'm making your favorite peach cobbler, the real kind, with the brown sugar crust." A small laugh. "You sound tired. Are you sleeping?" I stood at the kitchen window looking out at Maggie's rose garden, and I held the phone against my ear, and I thought about the email I had found in the trash folder. Just keep letting him think you are his biological child. I thought about the date, March 14th, 2018. Easter dinner that same year. "I'm sleeping fine," I said. "Sunday sounds good, Claire." "Perfect." Another smile in her voice. "Love you, Daddy." "Love you too," I said. I set the phone down on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down when you're afraid of what you might do if you're not deliberate about it. And I stood there in the kitchen that Maggie had designed herself in the house we had built our life in, and I thought, she does not know that I know. And right now, that is the only advantage I have. Maggie had a rule about Sunday dinners. She had instituted it the year Clare started college, when the house suddenly felt too large for 2 people, and the weekends too quiet, and she had maintained it with the gentle, absolute authority she applied to everything she truly cared about. No cancellations, no excuses, no phones at the table, just family food, and the understanding that some things in life were worth protecting from the noise of the world. I had honored that rule every Sunday since she passed. Even alone, I had sat at that table. But that Sunday, watching Claire set dishes out in Maggie's kitchen, with the practiced ease of someone completely at home, knowing what I knew and carrying it behind my eyes, while I answered Derek's questions about the Braves' season, and passed the breadbasket without letting my hands shake, that was the longest 2 hours of my life. Derek was in excellent form. He always was at Sunday dinner, relaxed, attentive, charming, in the particular way of men who have learned that charm is a tool and deploy it accordingly. He poured wine and asked about my blood pressure medication and told a story about a client that made Claire laugh and lean into his shoulder. And I watched all of it from across the table with the fixed, pleasant expression of a man who had spent 40 years running a business and knew how to keep his face from saying what his mind was thinking. "You seem quiet tonight, Daddy," Claire said, spooning cobbler into a bowl and sliding it across to me. Her eyes were warm. They had always been warm, that was the cruelest part of it. "Everything okay?" "Just tired," I said. "The kind of tired that comes with 68, sweetheart. Nothing dramatic." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her fingers were warm. I squeezed back. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time and thought about the fact that love does not turn off like a faucet. You cannot simply decide to stop loving someone because the evidence against them is overwhelming. It drains out slowly, painfully, like something vital leaving the body. And what replaces it, that cold, clear thing, is not hatred. It is something quieter and far more permanent. I was at Bob's office by 8 the next morning. Ray Coulter was already there, sitting across from Bob's desk, with a legal pad on his knee, and an expression that made my stomach clench before he even opened his mouth. "I need you to sit down for this one, Mr. Calloway," Ray said. I sat. "Lily received your letter." Ray began setting his pen flat on the legal pad. "I've been monitoring the situation with Bob's authorization, and entirely within legal bounds. I want to be clear about that. I had a contact at the Columbia Postal Branch confirm delivery. She received your letter on a Tuesday." He paused. "She also received a second letter 3 days later. Same return address. Your name on the envelope. Your handwriting or a very close approximation of it on the outside." The air in the room changed. "I didn't send a second letter," I said. "No," Ray said. "You didn't." He opened his folder and placed 2 photographs side by side on Bob's desk, images of 2 envelopes. "The first is yours, postmarked East Bay Street Station, Charleston, the day you mailed it. The second is postmarked from a branch on Rutledge Avenue, Charleston, 2 days after your original was sent." Rutledge Avenue is 4 blocks from Claire and Derek's apartment. Bob leaned forward, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. "What did the second letter say?" Ray pulled out a printed transcription. "My contact in Columbia, a former colleague completely trustworthy, was able to speak with Lily briefly under the pretense of a routine neighborhood survey. Lily mentioned receiving 2 letters from the same person and being confused by the contradiction." Ray's voice stayed even and professional, but his eyes were watching me carefully. "The second letter read in full. I apologize for my previous correspondence. It was sent in error and does not reflect my intentions. Please disregard it entirely and do not attempt to make contact. Edward Calloway." My hands gripped the armrests of the chair so hard the leather creaked. "She thinks I rejected her," I said. The words came out rough, scraped across something jagged inside my chest. Before we ever spoke a single word to each other, Claire made sure she'd think I didn't want her. "Yes," Ray said quietly. And based on what my contact gathered, Lily took it at face value. She's a private person, not the type to push where she feels unwanted. She hasn't attempted any further contact. Bob took off his glasses entirely and set them on the desk. His voice when he spoke was carefully controlled in the way of a man making a deliberate effort. Ray, can you confirm the second letter constitutes mail fraud under federal statutes? 18 U.S. Code Section 1341, Ray said without hesitating. Whoever uses the Postal Service to execute a scheme to defraud, including the fraudulent use of another person's identity, is subject to federal prosecution. Impersonating Edward in a mailed letter for the purpose of obstructing his ability to contact his biological daughter qualifies. He looked at me. This is not a small thing, Mr. Calloway. This is a federal offense. I stood up from the chair, walked to the window, pressed one fist against the glass, and held it there, staring down at King Street without seeing any of it. My eyes were burning hot and sharp, the kind of burn that comes not from sadness, but from fury, the deep, slow-moving kind that does not flare and die but simply settles in and stays. She has Maggie's smile, I said to the glass, to the street below, to no one in particular. My daughter has never once in 33 years looked at me the way that photograph looked. And Clare knew she knew, and she still put a stamp on a lie and sent it up the highway to make sure I never had the chance to find out. Bob spoke behind me, steady and quiet. Edward, we can fix this. Lily doesn't know the truth yet, but she will. We reach out again differently this time through Coulter directly in person. We explain what happened. A pause. But there's something else you need to know first. I turned around. Bob's expression had shifted, the controlled calm of a lawyer who has one more piece of bad news and has learned through 40 years of practice exactly how to deliver it. Ray got a call this morning, Bob said. From Martin Hess's neighbor. Ray's pen tapped once against his legal pad. Someone visited Dr. Hess at his home 2 evenings ago. A man in his late 30s, well-dressed. They were on the porch together for about 20 minutes. The neighbor said it looked like an argument. My blood ran cold from the inside out. Derek, I said. Ray nodded slowly. The description matches. Before we go any further, if you're still here with me, drop the number 9 in the comments right now. Just a single number. That's all I need to know you haven't left. Because what comes next changes everything, and I don't want you to miss a single word of it. A gentle reminder. The story ahead contains some fictional elements woven in for the sake of meaningful storytelling. If that's not something you'd like to continue with, this is a perfectly good place to step away, no judgment at all. But if you're staying, hold on tight. We were still in Bob's office when Coulter's phone buzzed on the edge of the desk. He glanced at the screen, and something in his face changed, not dramatically, not the way faces change in movies, but in the small, controlled way of a man who has received bad news often enough to have learned how to receive it without flinching. He stood up and stepped to the corner of the room to take the call. Bob and I watched him without speaking. 30 seconds. He came back and looked at me directly. There was a fire at Calloway Manor last night, he said. Neighbors called it in around 11. Fire department got there within 8 minutes and contained it to one room. Nobody was hurt. A pause that felt longer than it was. It was your study, Mr. Calloway. I was on my feet before I knew I had decided to stand. My files, already secured, Bob said, his hand coming up flat and firm. Everything Martin gave us has been in my safe since Tuesday. Nothing of evidentiary value was in that study. His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. Clare didn't know that. We drove to Sullivan's Island, in Bob's Lincoln Coulter, following behind in his own car. From half a mile out, I could already see the smell, before I saw the damage, that particular bitterness of burned paper and scorched wood that once you have smelled it, you never forget. The fire department had left 2 hours earlier. The house itself stood intact, the exterior unmarked. But when Coulter unlocked the side door with the spare key, I kept at Bob's office and pushed it open. The hallway smelled like the inside of an ashtray. The study was at the end of the hall. The door frame was blackened, the carpet inside reduced to a stiff gray crust. The bookshelves, 40 years of business records, legal correspondence, family documents were gutted. The framed photograph of Maggie and me at our 25th wedding anniversary, the one I kept on the corner of the desk, was gone. Just the outline of its frame remained on the scorched wall like a ghost. I stood in the doorway and gripped the frame with both hands and did not trust myself to step inside yet. Edward. Coulter's voice behind me was quiet and professional. The exterior camera on the northeast corner of the house, its motion activated, covers the back garden and the side door. I pulled the footage this morning. He held up his phone. You need to see this. The footage was grainy the way outdoor night cameras tend to be, but the timestamp was clear. 10:47 Sunday night, and the figure moving across the back garden toward the side door was clear enough. A woman, medium height, moving with the familiarity of someone who knew exactly where she was going and had walked that path before. She carried something under her arm, a bag or a container, something with weight to it. She used a key to enter through the side door, a key she had grown up with, a key to the house she called home. My throat locked up so completely that when I tried to speak, nothing came out for a full 3 seconds. I had to clear it twice before words were possible. She knew I was at Bob's, I said. My voice sounded strange to me, hollowed out. She waited until she knew I was gone. That's my read, Coulter said. A voice came from behind us from the direction of the front garden. Edward. Oh, Lord Edward, I've been trying to reach you since this morning. I turned. Coming through the side gate was Helen Mercer, our neighbor of 30 years. A tall woman in her late 60s with silver hair she wore in a braid, and the kind of direct, warm manner that Maggie had always said was the truest mark of genuine character. She had lived 2 houses down since before Clare was born. She and Maggie had walked together every Tuesday morning for 20 years. Her face when she reached me was creased with distress. She gripped both my arms with her hands and looked at me the way Maggie used to look at me when she was worried, head slightly forward, eyes searching my face for the truth beneath the composed surface. Are you all right? She demanded. I'm the one who called the fire department. I smelled it from my back porch. I wasn't sure at first, but then I saw the light in the window and I knew. She stopped herself, exhaled hard. Who did this, Edward? I don't know yet, I said, which was technically true. Helen released my arms but stayed close, her brow furrowed. You know, she said, and her voice dropped lower, more careful the way it does when someone is deciding whether to say something they've been holding back. Maggie called me once, must have been about a year before she got sick. She was in one of her thoughtful moods, the kind where she'd go quiet for a while, and then say something that stuck with you. Helen's eyes went somewhere distant for a moment. She said she'd been having strange dreams. About the hospital. About the night Clare was born. She asked me, and this is the part I've thought about many times, since she asked me if I thought it was ever too late to ask questions about things that had always felt slightly wrong. My chest tightened like a hand closing around my ribs. What did you tell her? I asked. Helen looked down at her hands. When she looked back up, her eyes were glassy with something that might have been guilt. I told her some things were better left alone, she said. I told her she had a beautiful life and a beautiful family, and that old doubts weren't worth disturbing all of that. Her voice cracked slightly at the edges. I wish every single day that I had said something different. I wish I had told her to ask every question she needed to ask. She pressed her lips together hard. I'm so sorry, Edward. I didn't know what I was telling her to leave alone. I put my hand over hers and held it there. My eyes were burning not from the smoke in the hallway, but from something that had no name, the grief that comes from realizing how close the truth has been for years and years and years, and how many quiet moments it almost surfaced before someone talked it back under the water. You didn't know, Helen, I said. Nobody who is kind enough to leave things alone ever does. Coulter appeared at my shoulder. Mr. Calloway, I've documented everything we need here. The footage, the point of entry, the pattern of the burn, it's consistent with an accelerant applied to the desk and filing cabinet specifically. Targeted. Not random. He lowered his voice. I'm going to file a report with the Charleston County Sheriff's Office today. Arson is a serious felony in this state. Second-degree arson alone carries a minimum of 3 years up to 25. Combined with the mail fraud charge, we're building something substantial. I nodded. I looked one more time at the burned outline on the wall where Maggie's photograph had been. She took the only thing in that room that couldn't be replaced, I said quietly. Then I straightened up, turned away from the doorway, and walked back out into the cold morning air. Bob, I need to go see Martin tonight. Alone. Bob started to object. I stopped him with a look. Alone, I said again. The ones that mattered, the ones that would keep me awake that night, came from Martin himself. When I pulled into the driveway of his small house in Mount Pleasant just after 7 that evening, and found him sitting alone on the front porch in the dark. He had not turned the porch light on. He was just sitting there in a wooden chair, with a blanket across his lap, looking out at the street, the way old men look at things they have been looking at for a long time and are learning to say goodbye to. When my headlights swept across the porch, he raised one hand in a slow wave. He had been expecting me. I wondered how long it would take you to come, he said as I came up the porch steps. I would have come sooner if I'd known, I said. Martin gestured to the empty chair beside him. I sat. The night air off the harbor had a bite to it, the kind of cold that comes in off the water in November and settles into your joints. Martin had a cup of something warm wrapped in both hands. He did not offer me any, not because he was inhospitable, but because I think he understood this was not that kind of visit. Tell me what happened, I said. Martin turned the cup slowly in his hands, looking down at it. 2 nights ago, around 8 in the evening, I heard a car pull up, nice car, quiet engine, the kind that costs more than most people's yearly salary. Then footsteps on the porch. He glanced at me sideways. I knew who it was before I opened the door. I had been expecting someone like him for a while. Derek, I said. Derek, Martin confirmed. He was dressed well, very composed, the kind of composed that takes practice. Martin's mouth curved without warmth. He introduced himself as your son-in-law, said he wanted to have a conversation. Man to man, he said. I let him on the porch. I did not let him in the house. Smart, I said. I have very little left to protect, Martin said, but I have enough sense to know what I don't want standing inside my home. He shifted in the chair, wincing slightly with the movement. He put a bag on the porch railing between us. Canvas bag, the kind you'd use for groceries. He unzipped it and turned it so I could see inside. Martin paused. It was cash, Edward, bundled. Significant amount, I didn't count it, but enough that it was meant to communicate seriousness. My hands curled tight against my knees. He told me what he wanted very clearly, Martin continued. He said I needed to retract the records I had given you. Sign a new statement saying the night log was incomplete and potentially misread, that the bracelet discrepancy I recorded could have had multiple explanations. He wanted me to state in writing that the DNA analysis I had commissioned was conducted by an unlicensed technician, and the results were therefore unreliable. Martin's voice stayed even, but his grip on the cup tightened visibly. And he wanted me to do all of this quietly, quickly, and without telling you or your attorney that this conversation had taken place. In exchange for the cash, I said. In exchange for the cash and his assurance, Martin said the last word coming out with a particular dryness, that no one would ever know I had spent 33 years keeping a secret that destroyed 2 families. The street was quiet. A car passed at the end of the block, headlights sweeping briefly across the porch, then gone. I looked at the side of Martin's face, the loose skin at his jaw, the deep lines around his eyes, the yellow tinge that the porch shadows could not quite hide. A man with 3 months left, sitting in the cold, with a bag of someone else's money on his railing. "What did you say to him?" I asked, though I already knew. Martin would not have told me any of this if he had said yes. Martin set the cup down on the arm of his chair and turned to look at me fully for the first time since I had sat down. His eyes in the dim light were completely clear. "I told him I had stage 4 pancreatic cancer," he said. "I told him that I had perhaps 12 weeks left to live, give or take. I told him that the money in that bag was not going to buy me a single additional day, and that my medical bills were already handled." A pause. "And then I told him that the only currency that meant anything to me at this point in my life was the ability to look at myself clearly in whatever time I had remaining, and that I had already spent 33 years being unable to do that." Martin's voice was absolutely steady. "I told him to take his bag off my porch railing, despite everything. Despite the burned study, and the forged letter, and the weight of the entire preceding week pressing down on my chest, I felt something loosen inside me when he said that. Something tight and painful, releasing, just slightly. "He didn't go quietly," I said. "No." Martin picked up his cup again. "He tried the other approach. Said that if I didn't cooperate, he would make sure certain information about my involvement in the original cover-up became very public, very fast. That my medical license, what was left of it in my retirement, could be formally revoked. That my family would carry the association." He looked back out at the street. "I told him my medical license was already the least of my concerns and that my family had been told everything already. I told him there was nothing he could take from me that I hadn't already chosen to give up." Martin's mouth pulled into something that was finally an actual smile, tired and thin but real. He didn't like that answer. "I imagine he didn't," I said. He picked up the bag. He walked back to that very expensive car. Martin glanced at me. Before he got in, he stood by the driver's door for a moment and looked back at me. He didn't say anything else, but the way he looked. Martin stopped. "Edward, I have been practicing medicine for 40 years. I have seen people at their worst in pain, in fear, in grief. That look was not anger. It was calculation. He was already deciding what came next. The cold off the harbor moved through me like a current. "Martin," I said carefully, "is there anyone who can stay with you tonight?" "Family, a neighbor." Martin waved one hand dismissively. "My daughter is in Greenville. I am fine, Edward. I am an old man with cancer who has made his peace with the fact that he cannot control everything." He looked at me with the steady directness I had come to recognize as his particular form of courage. "What I can control is what I've already done, and I have done it." He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and produced a small USB drive which he held out toward me. "Give this to Bob Flanagan tonight. I recorded everything I've told you, everything about the night of January 12th, everything about what Derek Maddox said on this porch 2 evenings ago." After Ray Coulter told me Derek had met with Patricia Odom, I began recording every unexpected visitor on my phone. I knew someone would come eventually. I simply did not know when. He pressed the drive into my palm. "Video. Transferred to that drive this afternoon." His hand did not waver as he held it out. "I recorded it because I am not naive, Edward. I know what a man like Derek does when he decides what comes next. I wanted to make sure the truth had somewhere to live in case I wasn't available to speak it myself." I took the drive from his hand. It was small and light and ordinary looking, the kind of thing you could lose in a coat pocket without noticing. I closed my fingers around it. "Thank you, Martin," I said. My voice was rougher than I intended. "Don't thank me," he said quietly. "Just make sure it counts." I drove back to Bob's house that night, with the USB drive in my breast pocket pressed against my chest, and I thought about a man sitting alone on a dark porch with a blanket across his lap, and a terminal diagnosis, and a clarity of purpose that most people never find in a full and healthy lifetime. And I thought, whatever comes next, that man gave me everything he had left to give. I was not going to waste it. Coulter called at 6:45 in the morning, 3 words before I could even say hello. "Martin's been hit." I was already reaching for my car keys before he finished the sentence. By the time I got to MUSC Medical Center on Ashley Avenue, the sun was barely up a thin orange line at the edge of the sky over the Ashley River, the kind of sunrise that looks beautiful and feels wrong. Coulter was waiting for me at the entrance to the emergency wing, hands in his jacket pockets, his face carrying the particular stillness of a man who had already processed the bad news and was now managing someone else's reaction to it. "What happened?" I demanded, not slowing my pace as he fell into step beside me. "He goes out every morning," Coulter said, keeping his voice low and even. 6 a.m., same route down Hibben Street around the park back home. 23 minutes, his neighbor told me. Every single morning for years. He pushed through the inner door ahead of me. This morning at approximately 6:12, a vehicle traveling south on Hibben came through the intersection without stopping. Struck Martin as he crossed. Driver did not stop. My stomach dropped clean through the floor. "Hit and run," I said. "Hit and run," Coulter confirmed. I had someone watching the house, not continuously, but I had asked a contact in the neighborhood to flag anything unusual after Derek's visit. She heard the impact and called 911. Response time was 4 minutes. He paused outside the ICU waiting area. "He's alive, Edward, but he's in bad shape. Head trauma, 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding they've already gone in to address. He's sedated. They don't know yet." I pressed the heel of my hand hard against the wall beside the ICU doors, pressed until the pressure in my palm was sharp enough to focus on. "The vehicle," I said. "Partial plate from a security camera 2 blocks away," Coulter said. "I've already given it to the Charleston County Sheriff's Office, and I've been in contact with the DA's office. The camera footage isn't clean, but it's enough to run." He looked at me steadily. The vehicle was a late-model black sedan, registered to a holding company. I'm working on the ownership chain. I knew, without being told, whose name was going to be at the end of that chain. They let me sit with Martin for 10 minutes. He was in a hospital bed surrounded by the soft, mechanical rhythm of monitors and drip lines. His face bandaged along one side, his breathing slow and assisted. He looked smaller than he had the night before on his porch. People always look smaller in hospital beds, diminished by the machinery, by the stillness, by the particular cruelty of the body at its most vulnerable. I pulled the chair close and sat. I leaned forward with my elbows on my knees and looked at him. "You gave me everything last night," I said quietly, not caring whether he could hear or not. "You hear me, Martin. You did your part. Now you rest. I'll take it from here." I stayed until the nurse asked me to step out. Then I drove straight to Bob's office. He was already there when I arrived. Coulter had called him too. Bob had the USB drive in his hand when I walked in, and his expression was the most serious I had seen from him in 40 years of knowing him. "I watched it twice this morning," Bob said without preamble, "before you got here." "Sit down, Edward." I sat. Bob plugged the drive into his laptop and turned the screen toward me. The video was shot on a phone propped on what looked like a bookshelf in Martin's living room. The angle was slightly off-center, but clear enough. Martin sat in the armchair I recognized from his study upright, composed, wearing the same cardigan he'd had on when I left him the previous evening. He had recorded it within the hour after I drove away. He spoke for 22 minutes without notes. His voice was steady throughout, steadier than mine would have been. He described the night of January 12, 1991, in complete detail: the power failure, the 2 births, the bracelet transposition, the morning discovery. He named every person present. He described Gerald Whitmore's response word for word. He described signing the falsified documents and why. And then in the final 4 minutes, he described Derek Maddox's arrival on his porch 2 evenings prior. The canvas bag, the cash, the demands, the threats, the refusal. He ended with these words, looking directly into the camera, with the clear, unflinching eyes of a man who had finished being afraid. My name is Dr. Martin Hess. I practiced medicine in Charleston, South Carolina for 40 years. I was a coward for 33 of them. I am choosing in whatever time God sees fit to leave me not to be one any longer. Everything I have stated in this recording is the truth. All of it. I have also provided the original night log from January 12, 1991, to attorney Robert Flanagan of Flanagan and Associates, Charleston. I ask only that the two families affected by what happened that night are given the full truth and the dignity that truth carries with it. God forgive me for waiting so long to give it to them. The video ended. The screen went dark. I pressed both hands over my face and held them there. My shoulders shook once, just once, and then I got it back under control. The way you do when you're 68 years old and you've had enough practice at holding yourself together in rooms where falling apart isn't useful. Bob let me have that moment. Then he said carefully, "Edward, we have everything we need. The night log, the DNA, the video. This is a foundation that doesn't crack." He closed the laptop. "But before we file anything, before we take any of this to the DA's office officially, is there anything else you need to do first?" I lowered my hands. My eyes were raw at the edges, but my voice was level when I spoke. "Yes," I said. "I need to go to Columbia. I need to see Lily before she reads any of this in a headline." Columbia is 120 miles from Charleston. On a clear day, 2 hours on I-26, if the traffic behaves itself, which it usually does on a Friday morning, heading inland. Coulter drove. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the low country flatten out into Midlands farmland, the Spanish moss giving way to open fields and pine stands, and I thought about everything I was going to say, and everything I had no idea how to say. Coulter had called Lily the day before. He had introduced himself as a private investigator working on behalf of a client in Charleston who had important information related to her birth origins. He had been honest about the fact that it was serious. He had been careful about the fact that it was not a threat. And somehow I still marveled at this. She had said yes. What exactly did she say? I had asked Coulter when he told me. She said, "I've been wondering if something like this was going to happen since I got that first letter," Coulter replied. "Tell him I'll be at the Gervais Street Cafe at 3 o'clock. She had been waiting. Some part of her had always been waiting. We parked on Gervais Street just before 3. Coulter walked me to the door of the cafe and then stopped. "I'll be across the street," he said. "Take as long as you need. This one's yours, Mr. Calloway." I pushed open the door. The cafe was warm and smelled of coffee and something baking cinnamon. Maybe the kind of smell that makes a place feel like somewhere people come when they need to feel safe. It was half full, the comfortable afternoon lull between the lunch crowd and the after-work rush. I scanned the room, and then I found her. She was sitting at a corner table near the window, both hands wrapped around a mug, watching the door. When our eyes met, she did not look away. She held my gaze with the steady, evaluating look of someone who had decided to be brave about this and was committed to seeing it through. I walked across the cafe toward her, and with every step, the thing I had seen in the photograph became more real and more devastating. The set of her jaw, the precise way she held her head, the slight crinkle at the corners of her eyes, even when she wasn't smiling. 33 years old, a stranger, and she was wearing Maggie's face so completely that my throat closed up and my eyes burned, and I had to stop 2 steps from the table and breathe through my nose for a full 3 seconds before I could trust my voice. "Lily," I said. "Mr. Calloway," she said. Her voice was warm, lower than I had expected, steady. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Please sit down. You look like you've been carrying something very heavy for a very long time." I sat. A waitress appeared and I ordered coffee I knew I wouldn't drink. When she left, Lily set her mug down and folded her hands on the table and looked at me with clear, patient eyes. "Before you say anything," she said, "I want to tell you something. I got your first letter, and then I got the second one." She paused just slightly. The second one didn't sound like the same person who wrote the first one. The words were right, but the feeling was wrong. I couldn't explain it, but I knew. My chest ached so sharply it felt physical. "Lily, I did not write that second letter." "I know," she said without missing a beat. "I think I've known since the day it arrived. I just didn't know what to do with that feeling." She tilted her head, Maggie's exact gesture, so precise it was almost unbearable, and said quietly, "So tell me what you came here to say." I told her, carefully in the order that would cause the least shock and the most understanding. I told her about Dr. Hess and the night of January 12th, 1991. I told her about the power failure and the bracelets and the morning discovery and the decision to bury it. I told her about the DNA results. I told her about Maggie's journal and the feeling Maggie had carried without ever being allowed to follow it to the truth. I did not tell her about Clare yet. I did not tell her about Derek or Maddox and partners or the burned study. There was a limit to how much truth one person could be handed across a cafe table in a single afternoon, and I was determined not to cause harm in my urgency to do right. When I finished, Lily was quiet for a moment, but not the quiet of someone shut down or overwhelmed. It was the quiet of someone processing at speed, turning something enormous over in their mind to see all its edges. Then she said, "Are you telling me that my name, my whole life, my parents, everything I thought I knew about where I came from, was the result of a hospital bracelet put on the wrong wrist in the dark?" "Yes," I said. "That is exactly what I'm telling you." She exhaled long and slow, her eyes dropping to the table for just a moment. Then she looked back up. "My parents, the Hartwells, Frank and Dorothy, they're good people, the best people I know." Her voice was firm on this, protective in the way that told me everything about how she had been raised and who she had become. "None of what you've told me changes that." "It shouldn't," I said immediately. "It doesn't. They raised you. That is not nothing. That is everything." Something in her face softened slightly. Not relief, exactly, more like recognition. Like she had needed to hear that said out loud by the specific person saying it. "The first letter," she said after a moment, "you wrote it by hand." "I did." "Why not email? Why not call?" I thought about how to answer that, and then I decided the honest answer was the only one worth giving. "Because the first thing I ever said to you deserved to be something I touched," I said. "Something I held in my own hands before I let it go." Her eyes filled sudden and bright, the way eyes fill when something reaches past all the carefully maintained composure and lands directly on the thing underneath. She pressed her lips together hard and looked out the window for a moment, blinking fast. "The woman who wrote the second letter," she said, still looking at the window. "The one pretending to be you." She turned back to me and her voice was steady again, but her eyes were asking something far more complicated than the words. "Is she someone I should be afraid of?" I looked at my daughter, my actual daughter, the one who had Maggie's smile and Maggie's gesture and Maggie's way of going quiet before she said something that mattered, and I understood that I could not protect her from the rest of the truth forever. Only from receiving it all at once on a Friday afternoon in a cafe on Gervais Street, before she had even caught her breath from the first of it. "Not right now," I said carefully. "Right now you're safe. And I promise you, I give you my word, as whatever I am to you, that I will tell you everything, all of it, but not today." I reached across the table slowly, giving her every chance to pull back if she needed to. I placed my hand over hers. Today, I just needed you to know you exist. That someone spent 33 years not knowing you were out there and is going to spend whatever time he has left making sure you never doubt that you were worth finding. Lily looked down at my hand over hers. Then she turned her hand over and held on. Outside the cafe window, the Friday afternoon traffic moved slowly down Gervais Street in the pale November sunlight. Neither of us spoke for a long moment, but it was not an empty quiet. It was the quiet of two people standing at the very beginning of something, listening to it take its first breath. In the 2 weeks after I came back from Colombia, things moved the way things move when they have been held back for a very long time all at once, and faster than anyone was ready for. Bob filed the preliminary legal motions with the Charleston County DA's office on a Monday morning. By Wednesday, the DA had opened a formal investigation. By Friday, subpoenas had gone out for Derek's financial records, his phone records, and the incorporation documents for Maddox and Partners, LLC. Coulter submitted his full investigative report. The surveillance logs, the mail fraud evidence, the hit-and-run findings, the testimony about Derek's visit to Martin's porch, and Martin's video transferred from the USB drive to a secured evidence file went into the chain of custody under Bob's supervision. I did not call Claire. I did not reach out to Derek. I let the machinery of the law do what it was built to do, and I tried to sleep at night, which I mostly failed at. It was on a Thursday morning, 12 days after Columbia, that Claire walked into Bob's office without an appointment. I was already there. I had been coming in most mornings by then, more to have somewhere purposeful to be than because there was always something specific to discuss. Bob's receptionist knocked and leaned in with an expression that told me something unexpected was happening. "There's a woman here asking for Mr. Flanagan. She says her name is Clare Maddox." Bob and I looked at each other across the desk. "Send her in," Bob said. She came through the door and stopped when she saw me. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face, surprise, calculation, a rapid reassessment. And then she composed herself with the practiced speed of someone who had been managing her expressions in front of this man her entire life. But she looked terrible. That was the first thing I noticed beneath all the composure. Her hair was pulled back unevenly, which she never did. There were shadows under her eyes deep enough to suggest she had not slept properly in days. Her hands, when she gripped her bag strap, were white at the knuckles. "Daddy," she said. The word hit me somewhere old and deep the way it always had. I hated that it still did. "Claire," I said, "sit down." She sat in the chair beside mine, not across the desk from Bob, but next to me the way she would have sat as a child. Whether that was instinct or strategy, I genuinely could not tell. With Claire in those days, I could no longer tell. "I know what's happening," she said, looking at Bob first, and then at me. Her voice was trying for steadiness and not quite getting there. "I know about the subpoenas. Derek told me he found out this morning through his attorney." She pressed her lips together, then released them. "I want to know what my options are." Bob leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "Claire, I represent your father. I can't advise you. You need your own counsel." "I'm not asking for legal advice," she said quickly. "I'm asking—" She stopped. Tried again. "I want to know what Derek has done. Because I think—" Her voice cracked on the edge of that sentence and she pulled it back together visibly, her jaw working. "I think I may not know everything." Bob opened a folder on his desk. He turned it so she could see the first page. The Maddox and Partners registration, the beneficial ownership filing the name Glenn Torbett as registered agent. Claire stared at it. Her face went very still. "This company," Bob said, his voice measured and professional, "has been positioned to receive a significant transfer of assets from the Callaway estate. The transfer mechanism required either Edward's voluntary participation or a court order declaring him legally incompetent." He turned to the next page, Derek's consultations with the 3 law firms. Your husband inquired about that process at 3 separate firms over the past 2 years. Claire's hand came up to her mouth, a single sharp movement like something had struck her. And this, Bob said, placing the final page on top, the divorce filing recovered from Derek's attorney's records during discovery, was prepared 6 months ago, before any of this came to light. The sound that came out of Claire then was not a word. It was something that started as a breath and became something rawer, a short, broken exhalation that she immediately fought to suppress, pressing the back of her hand hard against her lips. Her eyes filled so fast, it was like watching glass fill with water. "He was going to leave me," she said. The words were muffled against her hand. "After all of it, after everything She couldn't finish. Her shoulders pulled in, and she bent slightly forward the way people do when something hits them in the center and the body tries to fold around the pain. I watched her cry and felt the most complicated thing I have ever felt in 68 years of living, which is the particular agony of loving someone and being betrayed by them, and watching them be betrayed in turn all at the same time, and not knowing which of those feelings was the right one to lead with. "Claire," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Look at me." She looked up. Her eyes were red mascara tracking down one cheek, composure completely gone. For the first time in years, maybe the first time since she was small enough to fall off her bicycle and come running, she looked entirely unguarded. "Did you know," I asked, "about the plan to have me declared incompetent? Did you know that part?" She shook her head. Fast, emphatic. "No, I swear to God, Daddy. I knew about the money. I knew Derek was thinking about your estate. I let myself not ask too many questions, but I never knew about the competency filing. I never would have." She stopped, drew a breath that shook audibly. "I'm not innocent. I know I'm not innocent. But I didn't know all of it." Bob placed his hands flat on the desk. "Claire, I'll say this once and clearly. If you want any consideration from the DA's office, you need to retain your own attorney today, and you need to be completely honest with them about everything you know. Everything, starting with 2018. Claire looked at him. Then she looked at me, and in her eyes was something I had not seen there in a very long time. Not the warmth she performed so well. Something underneath the performance. Something that looked in this unguarded moment like genuine fear and genuine shame occupying the same space. She picked up her bag, stood up. At the door she paused, and when she turned back, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know I'm sorry." I held her gaze. My chest was an open wound. "I know you are," I said. "Go get a lawyer, Claire." She left. Bob and I sat in the quiet of his office and outside on King Street. The ordinary world went on doing ordinary things, indifferent to the fact that something that had taken 33 years to build had just finished falling down. I had driven past Charleston County Courthouse on Broad Street 10,000 times without ever needing to go inside. That morning I arrived an hour early and sat in my car in the parking garage on Queen Street, watching pigeons on the courthouse roof, thinking about Martin Hess, moved out of ICU 4 days ago, conscious, but not yet speaking clearly. He was alive. That had to be enough. Bob met me on the steps at 8:45, leather briefcase worn at the corners from decades of serious work. He looked at me the way he had for weeks, checking, making sure I was still holding together. "Ready," he said. "No," I said. "Let's go anyway." The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, wood-paneled, fluorescent lit, smelling of old paper and floor wax. Derek sat at the defense table in a charcoal suit, his expression carrying that smooth composure I had watched him deploy across my dining table for 7 years. Claire sat on the opposite side of the gallery, 3 rows back, hair down, face bare of makeup. She looked younger without it. She looked in a way that broke something quiet inside my chest, like a woman who had finally stopped pretending. Then I saw Lily, at the far end of my row. Dark green jacket, hands folded back straight. She had driven from Colombia without telling me. When she caught my eye, she gave me one small, steady nod. I had to look away before the burning in my eyes became something I couldn't manage in a public room. Bob presented the evidence methodically, the night log, the DNA analysis, Martin's video played in full under the business records exception, the Maddox Shell Company financials, the competency petition drafts, the mail fraud documentation. Derek's attorney objected at intervals. The judge overruled most of it. Then the DA stood and announced one additional piece of evidence: digital forensic recovery from Claire's phone obtained through a lawful search warrant. In a folder of deleted voice memos, believed permanently erased investigators had found a recording made 22 months prior. The courtroom speakers crackled. A kitchen. A chair scraping. Then Claire's voice relaxed, unhurried, as if discussing something entirely ordinary. Just keep letting him think everything is normal. He's not going to ask questions he never does. He trusts me completely. That's the thing about him, Derek. He's always trusted me completely. Derek's voice followed. And if he changes the estate documents before we're in position, a pause. Then Claire. He won't. I'll know if he's thinking about it. And honestly, the way his health has been since Mom died, we probably have less time to wait than we thought. The courtroom went absolutely still. I sat with my hands flat on my thighs and breathed in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way Maggie always told me to breathe, when I was about to lose something I couldn't afford to lose. We probably have less time to wait than we thought. 33 years of birthday mornings and Sunday dinners and complete unguarded trust reduced to a timeline. A waiting game built around my grief. Bob's hand came down briefly on my forearm. 1 second. Just enough. Across the aisle, Claire gripped the bench rail with both hands. Knuckles white, shoulders carrying the curve of someone who has stopped trying to stand up straight under a weight too long carried. Then she looked directly at me. Her lips moved 2 words without sound. I'm sorry. My jaw tightened until it ached. I didn't look away. But I didn't answer, not there, not like that. The judge set trial for the first week of January 2025, finding sufficient probable cause on all counts. As the gavel fell, I looked past Claire to the end of my row, where Lily sat with her hands still folded and her back still straight. She reached out and touched the empty seat between us, just her fingertips on the wood. An offer. A steadiness. I moved down the row and sat beside her. Outside the high courthouse windows, the November sky over Charleston was the hard, clear blue that comes after a long rain, when everything obscuring the light has finally been washed away, and you can see exactly how far it reaches. The courthouse smelled the same way it always had: old wood floor wax and the faint metallic bite of recirculated air. I had been inside Charleston County Courthouse a dozen times over the years, signing contracts, witnessing depositions, shaking hands with men in suits. But the morning of January 9th, 2025, every corridor felt narrower, every footstep louder, as if the building itself understood the weight of what was about to be decided inside courtroom 4. Bob walked beside me, his leather briefcase swinging at his side. His jaw set the way it always got when he was running through legal arguments in his head. "You doing all right?" he asked without looking at me. "No," I said honestly, "but let's go in anyway." He let out a short breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. "That's the most honest answer you've given me in 40 years of friendship." I almost smiled. Almost. The gallery was already half full. Journalists occupied the back 2 rows with notepads balanced on their knees. I spotted Helen Mercer near the aisle, her silver hair pinned neatly, her gloved hands folded in her lap. She caught my eye and pressed her lips together in a small, firm nod, the kind that said, "I'm here. You're not alone." My chest tightened so hard I had to breathe through my nose to keep steady. Lily was already seated 3 rows ahead of me. I recognized the back of her dark hair, the way she sat perfectly upright, the way Maggie used to sit. My heart lurched upward into my throat. 34 years. She had lived 34 years without knowing me, without knowing any of this. And here she was in a courtroom learning the truth the hardest possible way. She turned as if she felt my gaze. Her eyes found mine dark brown, careful rimmed red at the edges from a sleepless night. She gave me a small wave, her fingers trembling slightly at the tips. I lifted my hand back. My own fingers wouldn't stop shaking. Claire sat at the defense table across the aisle. She wore a charcoal blazer, her hair pulled back, her posture rigid. But when she glanced toward me, her eyes cracked open with something raw and fractured, something that looked dangerously close to grief. My stomach twisted. Whatever she had done, whatever choices she had made, I had still spent 33 years calling her my daughter. That didn't vanish just because a judge was about to call her a defendant. Derek sat beside her expressionless, his lawyer whispering in his ear. He didn't look at me once. The Honorable Judge Patricia Weston took the bench at precisely 9 o'clock. The room went so still I could hear the clock on the far wall ticking. Bob leaned to my ear. The DA is presenting the full chain today, the night log, the video confession, the phone recording, the asset transfer documents. All of it goes in. And Whitmore? I asked. Whitmore's testimony is on record. He cooperated in exchange for reduced charges. He confirmed the 1991 cover-up was a deliberate institutional decision, not an accident of negligence. Bob's voice dropped even lower. Edward, the court, is going to hear everything. My eyes burned. I pressed my knuckles to my mouth and breathed. The district attorney, a composed woman named Sandra Reeves, stood and addressed the court. Her voice carried the kind of calm authority that courtrooms respect, measured precise and utterly without mercy. Your Honor, the state of South Carolina presents evidence of a 34-year conspiracy that robbed one family of their daughter and another family of the truth. The defendant, Clare Calloway Maddox, had knowledge of her non-biological status for 6 years and chose to exploit that knowledge for financial gain. The defendant, Derek Maddox, orchestrated a legal scheme to have Mr. Edward Calloway declared mentally incompetent, enabling fraudulent asset transfers totaling $4.3 million. A ripple of sound moved through the gallery. My hands gripped the bench rail in front of me so hard my knuckles went white. Claire's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor, characterization. Sustained on the phrasing, Judge Weston said crisply. Continue, Ms. Reeves. The morning proceeded hour by hour. Dr. Hess's video confession played on the courtroom monitor, his voice thin and graveled with illness, his eyes direct and unflinching. I was present the night of January 12, 1991. I documented the discrepancy. I reported it to Dr. Whitmore. He ordered it buried. I have lived with that order for 33 years, and I will not die with it still buried. When the video ended, there wasn't a sound in the room. Not one. Then Lily made a soft, broken noise in her throat, barely a whisper, but I heard it from 3 rows back, and I felt my own eyes go hot and wet. Bob put his hand briefly on my arm. Hold it together a little longer, he said quietly. I'm trying, I managed. At 2:17 of the afternoon, Judge Weston set down her reading glasses and addressed the courtroom. The court finds sufficient evidence to proceed to trial on all counts: fraud, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse, and arson of personal property. She paused, and the pause stretched like a held breath. The court further finds that the institutional failure at St. Francis Memorial Hospital in 1991 constitutes a systemic negligence claim separate from the criminal charges before us today. That matter will be referred to the appropriate civil jurisdiction. Claire's lawyer stood. Your Honor, regarding bail, denied for Mr. Maddox, Judge Weston said flatly. The flight risk is evident. Mrs. Calloway Maddox's bail is set at $250,000 with passport surrendered by 5 p.m. today. Derek's chair scraped back hard as he rose, and then Ray Coulter was beside him, hand on his shoulder, voice low and firm. Derek's face went the color of old ash. I watched them walk Derek Maddox out of that courtroom in handcuffs, and my legs nearly gave out beneath me. I gripped the bench rail, locked my knees, and stared at the door until it swung shut behind him. Bob exhaled slowly beside me. "It's not over," he said. "But it's started. I know." My voice came out barely above a breath. "I know." Across the aisle, Clare pressed both hands flat against the defense table and stared down at the wood grain. Her shoulders shook once, just once, and then she pressed her lips together so hard they went white. I looked away. My heart felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. January in Charleston tells no comfortable lies. Gray mornings, cold harbor wind slicing through every coat, the city stripped bare and honest beneath a low sky. After 33 years of polished surfaces and careful silences in my own home, I found that kind of brutal honesty almost settling. Bob called on a Thursday morning, 11 days after the preliminary hearing. "Get dressed. I need you at the office by 10. Ray has something you have to see in person." I didn't argue. I pulled on my coat, filled Maggie's old dark blue travel mug, the one with the chipped rim she'd given me 7 Christmases ago, and drove into Charleston before the fog finished lifting off the river. Bob's office on King Street was already running at full speed. Ray Coulter sat at the conference table with a laptop and 2 accordion files, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, despite the cold alert in the sharp electric way of a man running on purpose rather than sleep. "What did you find?" I asked, dropping into the nearest chair. Ray turned the laptop to face me. A spreadsheet filled the screen columns of account numbers, transfer dates, and dollar amounts arranged in neat, damning rows. "Derek's been moving money for longer than we thought," Ray said. "First transfer March 2019. 5 years ago, Edward. He didn't start planning this when Dr. Hess came to you. He started before Maggie died." The coffee mug went cold in my grip. My stomach dropped clean through the floor. "Before Maggie?" I repeated, my voice barely holding its shape. "Before Maggie." Ray leaned forward. "We subpoenaed the records through corporate disclosure filings. Derek set up 3 shell LLCs, Delaware, Nevada, Wyoming, between 2018 and 2020, each funded through transfers routed from accounts carrying your name as secondary holder." Bob slid a printed page across the table. "Your joint business account with Maggie. Derek had access because Maggie added Clare as a family beneficiary in 2017, completely routine estate planning. He used that access as a backdoor. $4.3 million, Edward." My hands began to shake. I set the mug down before I lost it entirely. Ray clicked the laptop again. A formal petition appeared dated September 2023, 2 months before Maggie passed. A draft competency petition prepared by a private attorney in Columbia. It names you as the subject, fabricates a series of incidents, missed appointments, alleged confusion, a neurologist visit that never happened, and lists Clare as proposed guardian. My jaw locked so hard I thought something might crack. "The plan," Bob said carefully, "was to file the moment Maggie was gone. Have you declared incompetent within 6 months? Clare controls the finances. Derek controls Clare. He was using her," I said. The words came out ragged like cloth torn on a nail. "He was," Ray confirmed. "We recovered a text from Derek's cloud backup, November 2023. It reads, 'M is almost gone. Timeline moves to phase 2. C doesn't need the full picture yet. Keep her focused on the money.'" I pushed back from the table and walked to the window, pressing one hand flat against the cold glass. My whole body was vibrating at a frequency just below breaking. "He called her C," I said, "like a piece on a board, because that's exactly what she was to him," Bob said quietly. I turned back. "Does she know he was planning to cut her out entirely?" Ray nodded. Prosecution shared the recovered texts with her attorney under discovery. She's cooperating Edward, because she now knows Derek's endgame. Once guardianship was secured and her usefulness finished, he planned to divorce her and walk away with half of everything that remained. Claire was never the destination. She was the mechanism. The room felt very small. I sat back down slowly and pressed both palms flat on the table, anchoring myself to something solid. Did Derek know about the 1991 swap? I asked. Not until Claire told him after her private DNA test in 2018, Ray said. That's when the competency scheme accelerated. If Claire wasn't your biological daughter, her inheritance was legally vulnerable. The petition was his insurance policy. Bob slid another folder forward, his voice dropping. There's one more thing. We found a safe deposit box, registered to Derek in Mount Pleasant. Inside, a copy of Dr. Hess's original report, the one from the tin. The air left my lungs in one long, hollow exhalation. He knew about Lily, I said, before I did. He kept it as a final card, Bob said. If the guardianship scheme collapsed, he could threaten to bring Lily forward himself and contest the entire estate or expose the scandal publicly to force you into silence. I pressed both heels of my hands against my eyes. My chest ached with something heavier and colder than rage, the specific grief of understanding that a man had sat at my dining table for 7 years, called me Ed, in that casual proprietary way of his, and spent every one of those years treating my entire life as raw material for his own design. He sat in my house, I said, 7 years. Bob reached across and put his hand firmly over mine warm, steady 40 years of friendship in a single grip. The trial date is set for March 3rd, he said. We have everything. Hess's confession, the night log, the DNA report, the text messages, the shell company records the safe deposit box. Derek Maddox built his scheme in the dark because he believed no one was paying close enough attention. He squeezed once. He was wrong. I nodded. My throat was too tight for anything more. Outside, the January fog was thinning. A pale strip of winter light broke across the King Street rooftops, and for just a moment, the whole gray city looked almost golden. I thought of Maggie, her diary, her careful handwriting. Something didn't feel right, written without ever knowing how completely right she was. I kept the thread for you, she seemed to say. You just had to find it. March 3rd, I said, wrapping both hands around the cold mug. I looked at Bob and Ray across the table. Then let's make sure every single piece is ready. March 3rd came in cold and clear, the kind of Charleston morning where the harbor sits like hammered silver under a pale sky. And the air tastes of salt and something electric, as though the city itself is holding its breath. I had been awake since 4. By 6, I was dressed. By 7, I was sitting at Maggie's kitchen table with a cup of coffee I couldn't taste, turning her old blue mug in my hands, and talking to her the way I had learned to talk to her since she left quietly inside my own chest, trusting she could hear. Today's the day, I told her. Everything you sensed and never could prove today, someone finally says it out loud in a room where it counts. Bob picked me up at 8:15. He said nothing when he saw my face, just clapped one hand briefly on my shoulder and held the car door open. That was 40 years of friendship distilled into a single gesture, and I was grateful for every second of it. The courtroom on the 3rd floor of Charleston County Courthouse was fuller than the preliminary hearing. 2 rows of journalists, a sketch artist near the aisle. Helen Mercer, 3 seats from the back, hands folded, face set with the quiet dignity of a woman who has waited a long time for this morning. Lily was already there. She sat 2 rows ahead of me, back straight, dark hair pulled away from her face, a small silver pin at her collar that caught the courtroom light. When I slid into the row behind her, she turned immediately, as though she had felt me the moment I walked through the door. You sleep? She asked, her voice low. Not much, I admitted. You? Not at all. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. I kept thinking about what I'd say if anyone asked me how I felt. I still don't have an answer. Neither do I said, and I've had 6 months to come up with one. She reached back between the seats and pressed her hand briefly over mine warm, steady present. My throat clenched so hard I had to look up at the ceiling for a moment to keep from coming apart entirely. Across the aisle, Claire sat at the defense table. She had cooperated with the prosecution. Her lawyer had negotiated reduced charges in exchange for her full testimony against Derek. She looked diminished in a way I had never seen her look before. Her posture careful, her hands folded on the table in front of her, like a woman trying very hard to take up no more space than she absolutely must. Derek sat at the adjacent table with his own attorney. He had not looked at me once since the proceedings began. Sandra Reeves delivered her closing argument with the precision of someone who has built a case brick by brick and wants the jury to feel every single one. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying clean and clear across the gallery. "The defense has suggested that this case is complicated, that the relationships involved make the wrongdoing difficult to categorize. I want to suggest to you that it is in fact very simple. Edward Calloway trusted the people closest to him. Derek Maddox looked at that trust and saw an opportunity. He spent 5 years building a structure designed to strip a 68-year-old man of his autonomy, his estate, and his dignity, and he used his own wife as the foundation of that structure without ever telling her the full design. The jury was 12 people who had listened for 4 days. Now they watched Sandra Reeves with the focused attention of people who understand that what is said in the next 5 minutes is going to matter. The evidence is not circumstantial," she continued. "It is documented. It is recorded. It is confirmed by the defendant's own messages, his own financial records, his own hand." She paused, and the pause had weight. "We ask you to return a verdict that reflects the truth of what was built in the dark and what it cost the people it was built upon." Derek's attorney offered a rebuttal that lasted 20 minutes. I heard very little of it. My eyes kept drifting to the jury, 12 faces arranged in 2 rows, neutral, with the particular neutrality of people carrying a decision they know is not small. The jury returned in 3 hours and 40 minutes. I felt it before the foreperson spoke, a shift in the air, a collective straightening of spines across the gallery. "On the charge of wire fraud," the foreperson said, his voice measured and unhurried, "we, the jury, find the defendant Derek Allen Maddox guilty." Claire made a sound. Not a word, just a sound low in her throat, like something giving way under pressure. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice guilty. On the charge of attempted witness tampering guilty." Each word landed like a stone, dropped into still water, the ripples spreading outward through the gallery in murmurs and exhaled breath. Beside me, Bob pressed his fist quietly against his mouth. Lily reached back between the seats again. I grabbed her hand and held on. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit arson guilty." Derek's attorney was already rising, already speaking about sentencing guidelines and appeals. Derek himself sat completely motionless, and it was the stillness of a man who had run out of moves on a board he thought he controlled. Judge Weston set sentencing for April 14th. She thanked the jury, dismissed them with quiet formality, and struck her gavel once, a clean final sound that echoed off the old wood walls of courtroom 4 and rang in my ears like something that had been waiting 30 years to be heard. I sat there for a long moment after the gallery began to empty. My legs felt made of sand. My eyes were burning and wet, and I didn't try to stop it. I let the tears come slow and quiet, the way rain comes after a long drought. Not grief, exactly. Something older. Something that had been waiting in my chest since the morning I opened that envelope, and the whole world changed shape. Bob put his hand on my back. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you some air." Sentencing day was April 14th, pale and warm. The azaleas along the battery already blazing pink, the air carrying salt and honeysuckle, and something almost reckless with hope. I wore the gray suit Maggie always said made me look like a man who meant what he said. I wore it for her, for both of us. Judge Weston sentenced Derek Allen Maddox to 11 years in federal prison with no parole before year 7, and issued a full asset recovery order, every fraudulent dollar to be returned to the Callaway estate with interest. Clare received 3 years of supervised probation, mandatory restitution, and a permanent bar from serving as executor of any estate she had not earned herself. Her cooperation had kept her out of prison. Whether it had saved her from herself was a question only time could answer. As we filed through the marble lobby, Clare appeared at my elbow, quiet, sudden, her face stripped of every careful layer she had worn for years. "Edward." Her voice broke on my name. Her eyes were swollen, red-rimmed, her lips pressed hard against trembling. "I know there's nothing I can say that makes any of this, Clare." I stopped and faced her fully. This woman I had carried to her first kindergarten class, taught to ride a bicycle in the manor driveway, danced with at her wedding, while Maggie cried happy tears from the front row. "I know Derek used you. I know you were afraid. But you had 6 years to come to me." Her chin quivered. A single tear ran down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "I told myself I was protecting something," she whispered. "I think I was just protecting myself." My heart felt wrung flat, but my voice stayed steady. "When you're ready to be honest, not for the lawyers, not for the court, but for yourself, I'll be here. I'm not your father by blood, but I raised you, and that doesn't entirely disappear just because you gave it every reason to." She pressed both hands over her mouth and sobbed open-wrecked, nothing left to hide behind. I briefly touched her shoulder. Then I walked toward the April morning waiting outside. 3 weeks later, Lily and I stood together in Maggie's garden. The azaleas were in full extravagant bloom, deep pink climbing rose white as paper. Lily crouched beside the rose beds in a pale green dress, touching a flower with 2 careful fingers. "Did your wife plant all of these?" she asked. "Every single one," I said. Maggie always said flowers were the only things in the world that couldn't lie to you. Lily's eyes went bright and wet. "She sounds like she was extraordinary." "She was." I cleared my throat. "She would have loved you, Lily." Lily looked up at me, her smile coming slowly spreading from her eyes, before reaching her mouth tentative and genuine, and costing something real. "I want to know you, Edward," she said, her voice catching. "I'm 34 years old, and I just found out I have a father. I don't want to waste another day." My throat locked tight, but the words made it through. "Then you won't," I said. "I promise you, not another day." She laughed and sobbed at once, bright broken, completely real, and stepped into my arms. We stood beneath the old oak in the Maylight, father and daughter, 34 years late and exactly on time. From across the garden, Bob called out, "I hate to interrupt, but this sweet tea is getting warm, and I am 69 years old, and I have been waiting a long time for a good ending." Lily pulled back, face streaming, smile wide enough to hurt. "He's not wrong." "He never is," I said. "It's his most annoying quality." I took her hand. We walked back together toward the table, the sweet tea, the warm afternoon. Behind us, Maggie's roses nodded in the May breeze, vivid, unapologetic, absolutely alive. And for the first time in a very long time, so was I. If there is one thing this long life has taught me, it is this: you cannot hide the truth forever. God has a way of bringing it back into the light, quietly, patiently, on His own schedule, and not yours. I have seen it with my own eyes. So let me say what I wish someone had said to me 33 years ago. Don't be like me. Don't wait for a sealed envelope to wake you up. Don't trust so completely that you forget to pay attention. Love the people around you, love them fiercely, but keep your eyes open. A kind face is not always a true heart. If I am being honest, I also believe this. The greatest tragedy in this story was not the money, not the fraud, not even the years lost. It was the silence. Every person who knew even a small piece of the truth and chose comfort over honesty handed the darkness one more day to grow. Don't give the darkness that day. This has been one of the most personal family stories I have ever had the courage to share. If any part of this grandpa's stories spoke to something in your own life, a trust misplaced, a question you were afraid to ask, a truth you have been carrying alone, I hope it gave you a reason to speak up before another day slips past. If this grandpa's stories moved you in any way, leave a comment below and tell me what you felt. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because the next family story is already waiting, and it is one you will not want to walk into alone. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with me until the very end of this family story. It means more than I can say. A gentle note: before we continue, some of the stories ahead contain fictional elements carefully crafted for educational and reflective purposes. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, this is a good moment to step away and find something that better suits you. No hard feelings and no judgment. But if you choose to stay, I promise to always make it worth your time.